Welcome back to Kingdom Tales. My name is Father Lee McLeod. I'm the pastor at St. Aidan's Church, and together we're reading through the Tales of the Kingdom. Right now we're in the third book of the series, the Tales of the Restoration. You know, sometimes when you're growing up, you can feel like you don't really know what you're supposed to be doing, or what your job is, or what place you're supposed to have. And it can be very overwhelming and feel very frustrating. Sometimes you feel like you're not doing things right. You feel like you try, but you just don't do the things that people expect you to do. It can almost, sometimes, make you not want to try anymore. The truth is, everybody feels that way at some point. It's not just a thing you experience when you're young. It can be a thing that you experience when you are going to work for the first time, or when you're meeting new people, or being in a new place. It can even happen when you're in a church. You just don't feel like you know what your place is, or what you're supposed to be doing, or what people expect out of you. If you want some encouragement, though, listen to the words of our story today. This is called Sighters Are Not Afraid. Cree, cree! The horns from the ranger watchtowers blasted their message. Cree, cree! 2 short blasts meant somebody was making crossing. Little Child had spent the days since his own crossing learning the ways of Bright City. Soon he would choose to become an apprentice to a master teacher who would teach him how to take his place in the restoration. If only he knew exactly where he belonged. Was he a player, or a dancer, or a songmaker, or a craftsperson? Was he a trader, or an artisan, a cabbie, or a crewmate? What was his special place? Cree, cree! The horns blared. Crossing! Crossing! Workers from around him cried. Little Child hurried to the watch gate that faced the garbage dump. Since his own crossing, he had loved being a part of these welcomings. How well he remembered the heartening hurrahs that had greeted him from the walls of Bright City. From the storage barrels beside the gate, he grabbed a colorful streamer bound around a slender pole. Tucking its handle into his belt, he scrambled hand over hand up one of the knotted hanging ropes, his feet pushing hard against the stonework and propelling him upward. At the top, standing on the wall walk, he saw a large caravan of carts and wagons lumbering across the garbage dump. They were being pulled by great beasts of the forest. A troop of rangers in working blues plodded beside the buck elks and deer stags, their stately heads of horns bowing and straining mightily against the leather halters and harnesses. From this distance, the cavalcade looked to Little Child like a moving line of greenery. The wooden vehicles were piled high with bushes and trees. The boy wondered, how in Great Park did they avoid the pit traps and bogmires? How did they get all those heavy carts up the mountains of refuse? How many days had they been traveling across the garbage dump? How had they avoided coming under the enchanter's power? Elsie! A voice called out from below. Hero vaulted effortlessly up the rope ladder to the wall walk. Found you! He grinned. Wrapping one strong arm around his younger brother's shoulder, he said, Oh, you see, Great Park comes to Bright City. But how? How? Stammered the lad, still amazed. How did they get this loaded caravan across that most perilous path? Hero threw back his head to laugh at Little Child's obvious amazement. Folks always wonder. First of all, it's not crossing alone. Those are the hardest. This is crossing again, a very different journey, believe me. Second, everything is under ranger protection. There are 12 to 15 rangers guarding the Great Park caravan. The forest beasts themselves are canny in path lore. They can sense the danger. And thirdly, there. He pointed with his finger. That's probably the biggest reason we can move earth and forest across the dump. Little Child spotted a slim figure arched on the outside of a cart, vigorously retying a rope to secure a tree bending far over the side and dragging its limbs in the dirt. The figure deftly kicked back, down, and out of the way of the wheels. Brushing its hands, it then shook a wild shock of hair that glowed in the sun like a field of summer wheat and could be seen even from the wall walk. Amanda, pronounced Little Child. He began to unroll his brilliantly huge streamer. Yeah, Amanda. Amanda scouts the paths. She knows which paths are shortest and which flat places are deceits. The princess is not afraid of the enchanter or his men, and he knows it. Little Child was amazed. She's not afraid of the enchanter? The streamer on the pole hung limp in his hand and curled on the wall walk like a bright cloth puddle. Wasn't that dangerous? Wasn't that overconfidence? Hero's eyes grew pensive. His smile faded, and he became serious. No, she's not afraid. And I'm not afraid for her. Amanda is one of those rare workers who always cites the king. A slight twinkle flashed in his eye. Go ahead. Ask her someday. I know what she'll tell you. She'll look you with deadly seriousness and she'll announce, "Citers are not afraid." As though everyone saw the king all the time in every place. But go ahead. Ask her yourself. With that, Hero turned, caught up the vaulting rope, angled himself backward over the stone, and began easing himself down the side. "Aren't you staying for welcoming?" Little Child called as he descended. The older brother paused, his feet braced against the wall, and looked up. "Can't stay. Got to make sure those sights are ready for all this green stuff. Tell Amanda hello for me." And then he was gone. Strange, thought Little Child. It wasn't like his brother to hurry off without a teasing word of greeting for his old friend. The boy looked over the wall walk, and there she was. Amanda, striding with sure steps toward the watch gate, brushing dust and soot from her blue garments, stamping her boots on the path. The other workers on the wall walk were crying, "Hurrah!" They were waving their pennants. Ranger horns blew their signal. Little Child lifted his streamer up and above his head. It curled and unfurled in greeting, catching puffs of wind in its slender sail of color. "Amanda!" he cried out, glad to see her. "Amanda, up here, up here! It's me, Elsie!" The young woman searched the wall with her eyes, spotting his flying signal, and then the boy. Although her face was streaked with smoky smears, her eyes flashed joy. "Hey, baby keeper," she called, teasing him with another nickname from the Great Park days. "You're just the fella I want to see." Carts bumped and jostled beside her, pushed and shoved by Ranger command into the city. Amanda ducked his way, and then this way, and then that way. In the great hubbub of bustle and busyness, workers unloaded the plants and bushes and trees, then unharnessed the great stags and bucks so they could water in the troughs and roll in the grass and graze on the soft fields outside the city walls. Amanda hoisted up a set of harnesses to her shoulder and called out, "Meet you at the scrub up," and then disappeared beneath him through the watch gate. He furled his streamer around the pole, clambered down, and tucked the banner back into the barrel. When he spotted Amanda again, she was with a crowd of travelers, splashing in the fountain just inside the gate. Her face and arms and hands dripped from the refreshing scrub. She turned quickly, flicked water at him, laughed, shook her hands, waved to her ranger friends, grabbed Little Child's arm in her own, and hurried him off. Well, my job is done. A most successful crossing, if I do say so myself. And now, you and I are going to hunt for lost children. Whoa, thought Little Child. I don't know anything about hunting for lost children. He stopped and pulled away from her grasp. She grabbed his elbow again and began marching him along. "That's why you're coming with me. I'm going to teach you how. Everyone's been so busy restoring things that no one has time to go on lost children hunts. And we've got all kinds of lonely, hungry, scared little kids hiding in the dark places that still remain in Bright City. Today I decided to do something about it. You and I are going hunting." Little Child knew it was pointless to argue. Once Amanda made up her mind, her determination was fierce. He noticed that the direction signs warned, "Moiroxen ahead, caution is advised." He pulled his arm away again. "Amanda, are we going to Moiroxen? I haven't been there yet. Hero says we should be careful not to go there alone." A yellow taxi honked its horn. "Honk, honk." The driver waved and called, "Amanda! Glad to see you're back." Amanda saluted a greeting. Hey, bub. The cabbie whizzed around the corner. Huh, huh. She turned her full attention to the boy, placing her hands firmly on his shoulders. Elsie, what is this? Are you afraid? You made crossing alone in one piece and in good time. You, of all people, shouldn't fear more oxen. I'm always afraid of new places, particularly new dark places. I don't think I'm very brave. The young woman looked at him sternly. She stared directly into his eyes and shook a little bit with each word. You must remember and never forget. Siders are not afraid. Come on, we've got important things to do. Little Child walked briskly to keep up with the hurrying princess. Under his breath, he mumbled, That's exactly what Hero said you'd say. She heard him. What are you talking about? What did Hero say I'd say? When did he say that? They had approached the great crumbling tenements where the enchanter once housed the starving poor of Enchanted City. Broken porches sagged. Windows were boarded up, staring sightless. Chunks of sidewalk littered empty lots where ugly junk with rusted nails and knife-like edges waited to snag and cut children at play. Yellow signs were posted on the buildings. Condemned! Enter at your own peril! The very air seemed sullen. It couldn't possibly, could it, be that anyone still lived in this desolation? Nothing green or growing could be seen anywhere. Little Child's heart felt cold. The enchanter had places in Bright City after all. Amanda motioned him to stop and scanned the surroundings for a moment. So, when and what did Hero say? Amanda never forgot things when she wanted to know. At welcoming, he said you would say, Siders are not afraid. Are we going in there? Yes, we are. At welcoming? I didn't see him at welcoming. Again, she steered Little Child's arm as they crossed the street. She pointed toward a dark, boarded building where someone had torn away the door at the entrance. Little Child did not want to go in there, even with Amanda. No, Hero said he had to make sure the sights were ready. But he'd said to say hi to you, though. Little Child was stalling. Amanda, Thespia says that Hero is a one only. Why is he? He saw her eyes flash, anger pushing behind them, and he didn't know why. She only said, You must ask Hero himself. Only he can give you the answer to that. She changed the subject. Now, we are going to concentrate on teaching you to hunt for lost children. They approached the dark shanty building in silence. Amanda held her finger in warning against her mouth, listening. Little Child listened too. Far off, he heard someone call out, Yo! A workman calling to another, then the drone of a machine moving refuse. Taxis honked in the distance, then, very faintly, he thought maybe he heard the sound of a child crying. There was someone in this awful abandoned housing project. We are going to go in there, Amanda said. We go in quietly, trying not to make a lot of noise. Lost children are afraid. They hide from danger. We don't want to startle them by making them think that we're after them, but we do want them to know that we are here. We will go into their dark place, find an unlocked room, and, in a not too loud voice, we will tell each other stories about the king. That's it? Little Child wanted to know. That's all? What if the enchanter's men are hiding in the darkness? Amanda smiled at him, her grin crooked as though she knew something no one else knew. Well, everyone loves a good story, even enchanter's men. She punched his shoulder lightly. Buck up, baby keeper. You just may be better at hunting than you know. Oh, Amanda, he thought, this is how you hunt lost children? You go into a scary abandoned building and tell stories in the dark? Well, he'd try it this once, but only because he couldn't get out of it. And he knew he wasn't going to like it. Now, Amanda said, looking at him, tell me what you know about sighting the king. Little Child thought. He knew that the king could enter through all locked doors. He knew that the king could bring light to dark places. He knew that you could see the king with your heart, even when you couldn't hear him with your ears, or see him with your eyes. He knew the king was always near, especially in places where you were afraid. He recited all his knowledge softly for Amanda, who nodded her approval. Then the two pushed back the door that had been nailed across the entrance. Swung back and forth loosely. They ducked their heads. The floorboards were warped. What if one gave way? Amanda unsheathed her silver-handled hatchet and held it before her for the warm light it shed, for the comfort of its low hum. Creak. Another floorboard groaned. Little Child hunched his shoulders. Then he heard what sounded like dull scampering, rodents running before them. He put his hand on Amanda's back so as not to lose her. He tiptoed. In the dark, Amanda found another door and pushed against it. By the faint light of the hatchet, they could see that the room beyond was filled with cartons and old chairs, the rusty springs of a bed without a mattress, and a broken, falling table. Here, help me, she whispered. Together, they pushed the junk to the sides of the room. Then she sat down in the middle. Remember, Elsie, the lost children hide because they're afraid. They've run away from cruel keepers and have not yet found kindness. Some of them are night crawlers doing odd jobs for the enchanter. The only song any of them know is the chant of the naysayer. They still remember the enchanter's rule. There's no such thing as a king, death to pretenders. And they have all been taught that seeing is believing. Oh, she said in a louder voice. It's cold in here. It's always colder in dark boarded places. Little Child had also begun to shiver, but not from the cold. He thought he heard someone cough in a room nearby. Who was that? Then he heard something shuffling in the corner. Well, Elsie, said Amanda a little louder, do you know a story about any lost children? Thought Little Child. Did he know any stories about lost children? Yes. He did know one story about a lost, frightened child who had escaped from the enchanted city and from beneath the enchanter's gaze and power. I do know a story, he replied. Once upon a time, not long ago and not far away. And Little Child began to weave the tale of two brothers, of himself and of Scarboy, who escaped together to find the place where trees grew. And the more he told, the warmer the room began to grow, and the more he warmed to the telling. And the more he remembered to tell, the brighter the light from the hatchet began to grow. Little Child told about Mercy and about Caretaker, and the more he told, the less afraid he felt. Yes, he remembered. I have always been good at telling stories. The cough was now in the room. Lumps and bumps began to crawl and creep out from the walls. Boing! A dim form plopped onto the old bed springs. The room was full of children. Little Child had told the story of how he learned to speak and how the young man had taught him to stand on his hands. He felt a tug on his arm, And the next thing he knew, a little girl with a dirty face and matted hair was sitting beside him, wiping her nose on his sleeve. A rough-looking boy in ragged clothes had scooched out of the shadows to sit with crisscrossed legs on the edge of the story circle. "Can't you tell us just one more story? One more story?" he said in a gruff, low whisper. And Little Child understood that the more he told the stories about the king and the king's people, the less fear he felt. The less fear was in the dark room. Amanda was right. Ciders are not afraid. Little Child looked at the dirty girl in front of him on the floor, and he told how Mercy had said, "Everyone in Great Park belongs to someone else." And kindness for her filled his heart. Little Child took her hand very slowly and gently, so as not to frighten her. "Do you belong to someone else?" he asked. She wiped her nose on his filthy sleeve this time. She looked wide-eyed at him and shook her head no. A big tear slid down her cheek. Behind him, he heard Amanda say softly, "In the bright city, all the children belong to someone." He turned his head and saw that Amanda was holding a little toddler in her arms. The child had tucked its head into her neck, and its thumb was in its mouth and had gone to sleep. The boy kneeling on the floor coughed again, and then his stomach rumbled. Little Child noticed that a smaller boy stood beside the rough-looking lad, and he coughed too, and was the skinniest little child that he had ever seen. "One more story?" the little one lisped. "Just one more story?" It was as though all these lost children had been hiding in this dark building, just waiting for a storyteller to come. Amanda shifted the baby in her arms. Its thumb stayed stuck firmly in its mouth. "Now," she said quietly to the lost children, "I have an idea. We are very hungry. I wonder if any of you are hungry too." They looked wide-eyed at her and shook their heads. Yes, they were hungry too. "Perhaps," she suggested, "you would like to follow the storyteller and me out into Bright City. It's a very safe place we're going, and everyone is welcome at the table. Then, when you've scrubbed up a bit and eaten, I think there would be time for one more story. You won't have to stay if you don't like it, but if you want to, you may. And I really think you might like the story. It's called Princess Amanda and the Dragon." Without a single word, the children gathered their things to follow. They hoisted small bundles into their arms. One of them found an axe handle. The little girl with the runny nose hauled the baby's bag. "An old pillowcase. Baby stuff," she explained. The littlest boy put on another sweater. They were bringing with them all they owned. None of them smiled. None of them made any protests as they left the crumbling shanty building. When the bedraggled little band stood outside the tenement, Amanda paused. She whistled with 2 fingers beside her teeth. Soon, a yellow taxi with a checkered side slid to the curb. The cabbie opened the back door. "Yes, sir, ladies and gents. Where you want to go?" The lost children climbed into the back seat, the girl with the runny nose, the rough boy with his little brother, Amanda, and the baby. "I think, Bub, first we'll get something to eat, and then we'll need to find a quiet place where I can tell a good tale." "See," said Amanda from the back seat to Little Child in the front. "That wasn't so hard now, was it? All your baby-keeping skills worked just as I suspected they would. Mercy taught you kindness as well." Little Child smiled to himself. She was right. Baby-keeping seemed to have a lot to do with finding hungry and dirty and mistreated children. And he suspected, yes, he suspected that he had discovered a place in Bright City. Yes, sir. Right now, he couldn't think of anything he would rather do than go into all the dark rooms, even the scariest dark room, and be a hunter. Hunter? Hey, that wasn't such a bad name. He didn't feel much like a little child any longer. Strange but true. Amanda was right. Ciders are not afraid.